Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hey there, and how you doing? It's a Monday morning. It's a sunny Monday morning, which is nice. And it's November 13th. And our government's going to shut down again. What, we got till Friday with the clowns in control in the house? Oh, jeez. All right. Before we get into any of that, I have to tell you, I did something that I don't normally do this weekend. And as usual, it turns out my mother is right. She always says to say yes. You know, when somebody asks you to do something and you're thinking, I don't want to do that. She says, always say yes, because only in going out into the world does anything ever happen, good or bad. But if you just stay, like my inclination is to stay cocooned, then, you know, nothing happens. And it is her nature to always try new stuff. It is my nature to avoid. It's bizarre because I've had an interesting life nonetheless, because I do try to take her. It's easy for her. It's not so easy for me. So I did something that I haven't done in a long time. I'd say decades. Yesterday, I went to a Steeler game. Now, obviously, the hook that drew me when the ticket was proffered was that it was not just a Steeler game, it was a Steeler-Packer game. My two teams. And when the invitation was proffered, I said, yeah, I can't imagine anything I'd rather do than watch two hapless teams play each other. But I went. And I just want to report back. I'm glad I did. Okay? So my mom continues to almost always be correct in her assessment that go out into the world, experience, push your comfort zone. So, a few things I want to share with you that I wouldn't have seen and or experienced if I'd done what I'm inclined to do, and that is stay home and watch the damn game on television, right? So I found myself at a pregame, I guess, tailgatey kind of a thing that had a slew of Steeler fans, Packer fans, and most astonishingly, Brits. There were these English folks there. And they proved to be the more fascinating crowd. I mean, I talked to some of the Packer fans. I talked to somebody, and their people are dancing. They're drinking. It was 11:30 in the morning. They were drinking. Not for me. But they were having a hell of a time, and it was nice to see the commingling of, you know, fans from different teams. But I met this guy who was responsible for bringing all those Brits to Pittsburgh for the game. He was a wonderful guy, fascinating guy, good-looking guy. And his story was he's from York, not New York, but York, the first one over in England. And he became, I said, well, how the hell did you get into football? And he said he had come to live in Baltimore in his youth. And he was totally taken by the game. Ended up meeting a wife here, blah, 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 this and that. He goes back to York and starts up a family. But he sees that there is this growing interest in American football that's being cultivated, as we speak, by the always ravenous National Football League, looking for more eyeballs. So we know that teams now regularly play in England and in Europe. And so it's working. I mean, they're starting to garner a pretty fervent base of Europeans who are fascinated by American. So this guy now manages some kind of a business in which he does tours. And I'm just going to share with you because he had the schedule on his back and I took a picture of it. The guys that I saw, including him, had been in State College the day before, Saturday. They had flown into Pittsburgh. They drove to State College to see that incredible, consequential game between the University of Michigan and Penn State. So these Brits had been at that game the day before, and damn, now they were about to go into the Packers Steelers. But believe me, that wasn't the end of it. They were going next. They'll be at the Monday Night Football game tonight. I can't imagine this guy putting this together. They'll be at Monday Night Football tonight. And then they go, I'm looking at his shirt, then they go, then they're in trouble, right? Because even in this crazed country, there weren't any football games to be had on Tuesday and Wednesday. So on Tuesday, they're going to Niagara Falls since they'll be close. They're going to be in Buffalo for Monday Night Football. And then they sort of have a travel day. And then they end up, it's unbelievable. Then they end up in his favorite place, Baltimore, where they see the Bengals and the Ravens, which, they've lucked into a bunch of huge games. And then they do another big college game, Michigan versus Maryland. And then they do the New York Giants, this must be Thursday night, New York Giants at the Washington Commanders. Then they fly to Kansas City, and they'll be at Kansas City Eagles game. Now, those are great games. And then I think they go home. I have to tell you, I personally would not want to see that much football in it. But so that there are all these English folk who were there, and it was their second game of the weekend. Unbelievable. And to think they'll be in Buffalo tonight. Wow. So that was sort of fun, and I thought interesting. And then, of course, there's the game experience. And I said to my friend, I'm warning you, I'm going to take a knee when they do the Star Spangled Banner. And he looked at me like, Jesus, God, no, please. And I was kidding, because first of all, there's no room to do a knee. And second of all, I'm incapable of, if I do get down on a knee, of getting back up very easily. So I was just teasing. But the Star Spangled Banner was sung by a quartet. Very nice, harmonious rendition. And I saw that, you know, how it can be so funny when people singing that unsingable song forget the lyrics, because the lyrics, I dare you to tell me what the hell they mean and or are. Americans don't have a clue. And what I noticed is they have now the lyrics on the big jumbotron. So no singer is going to muck up. They're facing that and they can see it. But what blew me away is seeing a question mark in the lyrics. And I thought, what? The Star Spangled Banner is a question? And I'm just saying this because perhaps you've never thought about it. But it turns out, according to the Jumbotron, it is two questions. I'll argue the first one might be correct. The second one, I'm not so sure. But stop and think about it. The Star Spangled Banner, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, say, can you see? Okay, there's the question. The first sentence is a question. Did you ever realize that? Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light? And then it gets weird. See what? They don't tell you. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? And there's a question mark. Now, what I find weird about that, oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed? So they're saying, did you see that at dawn? They don't say what. So I always thought, well, okay. But here's the weird part. The next paragraph, essentially, they also consider a question. So first question, oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? Whose broad stripes? Ah, here's a clue. And bright stars through the perilous fight, or the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. The flag was flying. But they have a question mark after that. And I don't see yeah, but then it's just one question. It's not two, but I never even realized there was one. I didn't. Because we sing this song and it's mumbo jumbo to us. It's word salad. And then, of course, on cue, oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? And then they come right on cue, the jets in formation, and they roar over the stadium and everybody goes nuts. The NFL again, never missing any ability to militarize the experience. Oh, is it militarized? It's mind-blowing. Okay. So the people around me were oohing and wow, as those jets flew over. And I said the most amazing thing about them is the timing. I'll give them that. Wow. they're flying like really fast. So this has to be so timed out that they come in on cue, right? As the song ends. What if the singer slows it down? What if the singer speeds it up? What the hell? How do they do that? That's impressive. It is. So while everybody's oohing and eyeing, a woman sitting in our row says, you know, they do that in Cleveland too. She was from Cleveland. As if, you know, it isn't just here, you guys. I said, yeah, I know. They do it in Green Bay too. And then it occurred to me, how many planes, jets, fighter jets are on any given Sunday, I'm asking, set and deployed to do this, you know, military Star Spangled Banner punctuation. No question mark here. It's an exclamation point, a roaring 4 jets. So I'm thinking that if an enemy ever wanted to attack the United States, it wouldn't be a bad idea to do it on a Sunday afternoon. Because think of all the football games. Think of and multiply those games by 4. And that's how many of our defenders, the jet fighters, are screwing around, wowing crowds at football games. I'm just saying. These are thoughts that occurred. They're 2 hapless teams, I have to tell you, even though I lucked out. Apparently, that is the most offensive, and I mean it in the terminology of the game. It was the most offensive game the Steelers have managed this year. More running, you know, and in that regard, it was nice. It was nice to see. But I just want to remind everybody that Steelers were playing the hapless, truly hapless Green Bay Packers. So it's unbelievable that they're 6-3. It's one ugly win after another. And so it's funny that even though there's a win, I got to tell you, the crowd looked pissed off through much of the game. The crowd, you know, was behind the team, but there's more muttering going on, and they, you know, ugly wins just don't feel as good. This is true. So at halftime, I decided to experience, you know, the halftime thing of heading out and getting some overly processed crap to ingest and maybe a beer. And so I did, and I stood there in line for the longest time you cannot imagine. And there, I was in a jumble of Packer fans and Steeler fans, and everybody was, I mean, it was nice. It was nice people all out. And people generally looked like, you know, they're having fun. I stayed and waited and stayed and waited and stayed and waited. And I finally got up to the front and I said what I wanted. And then I pulled out this $20 bill I had. And the woman said, "Oh, no, we don't take cash." And I'm thinking, why the hell didn't you tell me that before I stood in line for 25 minutes here? There's no signage, I'm telling you. Nowhere does it say credit only. Nowhere does it credit or debit. Plastic only. An old-fashioned girl like me coming in with a crumpled 20 in her pocket. And so I waited all that time only to be sent packing. Hey. So I just wanted to share with you my Steeler experience. Oh, and one other thing that I learned yesterday from my companion at the game was, I thought, really fascinating. When they remember before there were area codes for phone numbers. If you're young, maybe not, but if you're a geezer like me, you sure as hell do. I mean, I remember when a phone number was really just 5 numbers with a word in front of it. And you took the letters of the first 2 letters of the word corresponding to the letters on the rotary phone. Oh, I don't, but if you're young, I'm serious. Young people do not know this. They don't even know how to use a rotary phone. But when there were enough phones out there, finally, AT&T, that had the monopoly, Ma Bell, it came up with this idea: we've got to make the numbers longer, so we have to have, let's do this area code by geographic area, and we'll assign codes. Well, to make sure that there was not a lot of grumbling from the business crowd, because in America, business has priority. And AT&T was a big business, and it was going to take care of all the other big businesses. So they're thinking people are not going to like having to dial 3 more numbers, because people still were doing a lot of rotary still. And, it took time. So they thought, here's what we'll do. Stop and think about it. They wanted to start with numbers that would be quick on a rotary phone. What would those numbers be? They would be 1, 2, and 3, right? It gets to the little bar fast. Bang, bang, bang. So, what city is home to the most corporate entities? Do you know what the area code is for New York City? It's 212. What was the next corporate headquarters city at the time? What is the area code for? What is 312? It's Chicago, right? And damn if Pittsburgh at the time was not a huge corporate. We had an extraordinary number of corporate headquarters. And that's why we got the next one, 412. New York City, Chicago, Pittsburgh, 212, 312, 412. And if this is an apocryphal tale, I don't want to hear it, because it makes sense to me. And that came from somebody who had been at AT&T at the time. Isn't that interesting? As I'm avoiding the reality of the world today. Okay, I'm going to wade in here. 2 things that I saw which made me exceedingly unhappy was, over at CMU, the students were out and they were chanting, from the river to the sea. which any Jew hears is kill Jews. Believe me. But the CMU students added one I hadn't heard before, which really says kill Jews. They were also chanting, from the Philippines to the Gaza, globalize the Intifada. So they were saying, kill Jews everywhere. Now, some of you might argue that's not what they're saying. But then I would ask you, what does globalize the Intifada mean? Again, I'm just asking. Oh, geez, I forgot. Hey, I'm going to have to end the show a little early. I forgot. I have a televisit with my doctor because my doctor was just trying to call me. I wonder if they're running ahead. Wait. Okay, doesn't matter. It's not your problem. My problem. Okay, so I wanted to share that lovely piece of protest going on at a local university. And then I want to, here's another slogan. I'm into slogans now. Here's another slogan that was directed at the president of Northwestern University, which is one of my alma maters. The president of Northwestern University, whose name is Schill, an unfortunate name, Michael H. Schill. I should only add that Mr. Schill is a Jew. And as the students at Northwestern took to the streets, they chanted this at their president. Hey, Schill, what do you say? How many kids did you kill today? Now, that particular chant resonates with me because I was in a march in 1967 when I was a student at Northwestern, and I took a bus to Washington to march against the Vietnam War. And as we went near the White House, the chant was, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? And I found, I found that one sticking in my throat because I always was aware of LBJ's complexity, and I thought it was unfair, even though I suppose you can make a strong case that it was not. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't chant that one. And so it turns out it's resurrected now at Northwestern, 60 years later, more than 60 years later, and it's saying to the president of the university, how many kids did you kill today? When he's not the president, he is not in charge of a military. He is not at war with anybody. Why would they say that to him? Because he's a Jew. And anybody who still doesn't get it, that what is going on now is there is no difference between Jews and Israelis in the minds of a whole bunch of folks, say the majority, and certainly that's true on the left especially. So that students, you got to be pretty smart to get into Northwestern. It's a stringent admissions process. And to imagine that they thought that chant made any sense. Hey, shill, what do you say? How many kids did you kill today? And I know, I've been in so many marches, the fervor of a march and the chanting and how it does whip you up into a self-righteous fury. Pretty amazing. And one of the Jewish students who was there said, I'd say that the mood on campus is not so much pro-Palestinian as it's anti-Semitic. That's how a Jew understands what's happening now. If a chant like that makes any sense. Every Jew, according to these people, has blood on their hands. So they could say to me, hey, Lynn Cullen, how many kids did you kill today? It doesn't. And I do want to say that one of the things when I saw that I also thought about is, whoa, Northwestern has a Jew as president? Because back in the day, Jews had trouble getting in as students. The year I got into Northwestern, 1966, was the first year that Northwestern lifted the quota that they had very clearly in place as to how many Jews could get in. And what they did, even with the quota, is avoid Jews coming from, let's say, New York. The Jews they tended to let in before they lifted the quota were more likely to be small town Midwestern Jews, like Sherlyn Ross from Galesburg, Illinois, who is my mother, and like Norman Miller from Green Bay, Wisconsin, who is my father. Jews from Green Bay and Galesburg, the assumption in the anti-Semitic administration of the day was that they would be less, I guess, Jew-like, having lived as a distinct minority in these small Midwestern towns. When my dad, who had just been orphaned, he lost his mom and his dad within a year when he was 18 years old. So he went off to Northwestern in grief. And when he got there, he just knuckled down. And he took a great deal of comfort in the Jewish fraternity. There was one there. And a kid who was 16 years old, but was already a sophomore, because he was so brilliant, who was in the fraternity, took my father under his wing. Took him, he came from Chicago, and he took my dad to his home for Jewish holidays so he wouldn't be alone. This guy was such a mensch to my father. And I interviewed him many, many, many years later when I was doing a video on my father. And I was told this guy didn't do any interviews. And I wrote him a letter, and I said who I was and that I was Norman Miller's daughter, and this is what I wanted, and would he please speak to me, and that I would come to Chicago. And man, he wrote back right away and said, I would love it. Now, the guy in question was named Jay Pritzker. And Jay Pritzker was, well, part of this Pritzker family, now the governor of Illinois. The Pritzkers were incredibly successful Jewish family. And at the time, I think when I interviewed him, he was the president of Hyatt Hotels. Or he owned them. He just owned them all. I don't know what the hell. Anyway, he was a nice guy. He took my father under his wing. My father found a community among the few Jews who had been let in. And then it turns out that Northwestern proudly proclaims that it has come into a ton of money from a very rich donor for its, I'm remembering it was the business school, the School of Business. And if it's still true, that would be the Kellogg School of Business. I think that's what is at Northwestern. And there was a caveat that came with the gift. No Jews. And Northwestern said, no problem. We want that money. We want that money. My father was so appalled that he, along with a Jewish friend of his, asked to meet with the head of the university. And damn, they did get an appointment. And in they went. And my father, 18 years old, pleaded his case to the president. His plea fell on deaf ears. My father says he recalls hearing, as they exited, hearing the president telling his secretary, I don't want those kikes in here again. So you know what my dad did? I'm telling this story with such pride. He thought something's got to be done about this. And he imagined an entire week of events on campus, bringing in speakers who would speak to racism, anti-Semitism, bigotry. And he thought it should be called, this is like him, Better Understanding Week. Better Understanding Week. And damn if he didn't do it. He ended up traveling to Washington, D.C., speaking to Felix Frankfurter, who was a justice of the Supreme Court, asking him for help in finding people who would be willing to come and speak at such an event. Now, this would be 1940, 3940, just to put it in some historical perspective. Can you imagine a kid from getting in to see one of the, I mean, I don't know, maybe. And back in that day, you would have had to write letters, and letters would have to come back, and things would have to be. So he ended up meeting with him. He ended up meeting with a guy named Ralph Bunch. I don't know if your history knowledge takes you to Ralph Bunch, but he was the first Black person to win a Nobel Peace Prize. I believe it was 1950. So he hadn't won it yet, but he was a major civil rights activist. And he ended up being, I think, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. He got the Peace Prize, by the way. This will blow your mind. For helping to broker a peace between the Israelis and the Arabs in 1948. He came. And I saw there's a newspaper clipping that was carried in some newspaper about it, about Better Understanding Week and how all of these guys had come to Northwestern. And so all of these thoughts go through my head as I see that now at Northwestern, they're taking on the president of the university and they're accusing him of killing children in Gaza. Because he's a Jew. Just saying. I thought the best thing I read about the horror unfolding was by Pulitzer Prize winning columnist for the Washington Post, Colbert King. Who is also a black man. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. He said he was at a pro-Palestinian rally in D.C. And one of the things he saw, a sign he saw, said, "You want Holocaust, turn on your TV." And he said this: "The scenes of death and destruction coming out of Gaza are horrific. And these photos appeared on the heels of Hamas's 21st century style pogrom, the word for the organized massacre of Jews that took place during the 19th and 20th centuries in Europe. But this is no time for whataboutisms," he says. "Each hell is sufficient unto itself." In the days since the Hamas's October 7 onslaught, he says, "I have felt shock, anger, and revulsion over what's taking place on the ground in Israel and the Palestinian territories. So have many others. But today," he writes, "I'm filled with something else, a sadness that won't let go. Because I know that even after the guns fall silent in Gaza and Israel, and they eventually will, if only for a while, the post-October 7 open and global display of anti-Semitism will not abate. Neither will the ugly scourge of Islamophobia, conflicts, and difficult times lie ahead. I have lived too long." He's well into his 80s, I think. "And I've seen too much to think otherwise. During my tour of duty with the State Department in then West Germany, I visited Dachau. It was the first Nazi concentration camp where thousands of prisoners died between 1933 and 45. Untold numbers of Jews spent their last excruciating, horror-filled days in that damnable place. A few years later, however, I saw another, and for its place and time in history, more banal face of anti-Semitism. When I went to Prague's Jewish quarter, I didn't encounter, as in Dachau, tales of forced labor, medical experiments, firing squads, or gas chambers, but I learned about the gated walls that were locked at night to keep Jews separate from Christians who didn't want those they viewed as murderers of Christ around after dark. I saw in that ghetto evidence that the ruling class wanted Jews out of their lives, only they couldn't do that because Jews, it was said, engaged in the money trade and supplied raw materials and thus were necessary for the economy. Jews were allowed, that was one of the few things they were allowed to do, was the money trade. I saw the cramped ghetto where Jews lived with their cemetery. On display were broken tombstones where a Czech guide told me the graves were stacked 10 deep because there was no other place for Jewish bodies to go. It is said Hitler spared the Jewish monuments in Prague because he wanted to turn a site in the Jewish quarter there into, quote, an exotic museum of an extinct race. As part of my informal education in Europe, I learned about other places where Jews were forcibly kept separate from everybody else. There was, of course, the Nazis' Warsaw Ghetto, but there was also Rome's 16th century Jewish ghetto. I believe that's where the term ghetto comes from. In Venice in the 14th century, no Jew could live anywhere in the city for more than 15 days. In Europe, I saw anti-Semitism of centuries past, just as I learned here about centuries of American slavery taught in school as part of our history, but equally important around the table from family and church folk. I know about enduring the ugliness and brutality of slave ships, auction blocks, plantations, Jim Crow, and segregation. I've seen records in the Culpeper County, Virginia courthouse attesting to an enslaver's belief in my ancestors' inferiority by prices assigned to their heads. That hurt and anger will never go away, no matter how much Republican governors want to protect white children from learning about their forebears' obscene past. Racial and religious bigotry have gone, perhaps underground from time to time, but never permanently. Blacks and Jews of centuries departed knew that all too well. But there's something else I know. Palestinians also know what unrelieved suffering is. They also have been libeled. They too know what it's like to be scapegoated and cast down by powerful, pious people. Israel exists, and Palestinians must have a homeland too. It doesn't matter who got there first. They have a right to a safe place of their own without any semblance of neo-colonial governance, land that they and their children can call their own. and the distance to getting them there as I look on in the autumn of my years makes me mad. That's nuanced. You can't write that on a bumper sticker or put it in a chant, a slogan, or on a sign. And it has power by virtue of its nuance. From the Philippines to the Gaza, globalize, the Intifada, the brilliant genius students at CMU said. Filled with certainty. All right, that's going to be it for me today because I got to do as I said, a televisit. I'll be back tomorrow with my sister Susan, and I'll look forward to that. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.